In your handout, page 80 starts real estate calculations, and we are on page 5. Or sorry, page 80, you're going to have 5 test questions. That's where my brain's at. As a reminder, if you're going to the physical test center, they will provide you with a number 2 pencil. I borrow their calculator. I know some instructors take their own in case they run out. I've always borrowed theirs, and they've always had plenty. And then they will also give you a piece of scratch paper. Now, if you're going to audit from home or do it in another remote location, then I would just, what I've heard is scratch paper and the calculator. Those you got to do on the computer. You won't have your own scratch paper and own calculator. You can't have anything when they scan that room. Does that make sense? Five test questions. And the key thing that I want you to know on page 80 is just that idea of a percentage. So, for example, 3% you would put in your calculator as 0.03. 4.5% you would put in your calculator as 0.045. A percentage is a 1/100th. And I've been saying that to you in our time together because we're also going to learn what a mil is. And a mil is a 1/1000th. So a percent, point, number, where a mil is point, number, right? So we're going to come back to this, but I want to make sure that we understand how to get percentages with our calculator. I'm going to have you also dive in to the reminder in the middle of page 81, that number of square feet in an acre is 43,560 square feet. You may not need this number. When I go to the test center, I like to take this number and write it down in the corner so that if I do need it, I don't have a brain freeze and try to throw a niner in there or some weird combination. 43,560 is the number of square feet per acre. So if you need to convert square feet to acres, you would divide the square feet by 43,560. That's going to get you the number of acres. Financing calculations. The first thing I have you doing is loan to value, the bottom half of page 81. And loan to value represents the amount that the borrower is bringing as a down payment versus what they are borrowing from the bank. So in my notes, I have bringing versus borrowing. How much are they bringing for down payment, closing costs? What's the buyer's responsibility to bring? And what are they borrowing from the bank? And my bet is you will need to know how to calculate loan to value, but it will be in combination with another trick, like figuring discount points. Those two skills usually go together on the exam really well. My way of these examples, and the first one we did was a purchase price of $180,000, a down payment of $9,000. My way of figuring the amount they're putting down is to divide the little number by the big number. So 9,000 divided by 880,000 gets you 0.05 or 5%. Now the borrower is responsible to bring 100% of the money, which means they're bringing 5% and borrowing 95%. Now, for your career, you will use this. When you write an offer, you will write in the type of loan the borrower is getting and the amount of money they're putting down. Why do we share this with the seller? Well, number one, some sellers may not want to work with a loan or a specific loan type. Number two, a house may not qualify to work with a certain loan type. I've worked with properties that were cash only. There's no way it could get financed. Yikers. Yikers. But that is a thing. So you can't just use any loan with any house. Again, when a lender qualifies a buyer, they've got to qualify them financially and they've got to qualify the property in terms of condition and value. So there's two steps to that. And you might have a lender say to a buyer, we love you. You've got great credit. You got money to put down. You're awesome. But we're not going to loan money on that property that you like for whatever reason, condition or value. So you will use a portion of this. Like I said, you will write these numbers in your offer. Does that help review that part of it? Okay. The other thing that we reviewed was debt to income ratio. Now, I've been using the percentages 28 and 36%. These are numbers that I've seen in a lot of other study materials. And these are the numbers that if you're going to get a debt to income ratio question, these are the numbers I've personally seen on the exam. Different loan types have different percentages that they will look at for debt to income. So this is just one synopsis. What that 28% and 36% represent is what is the maximum amount of overall debt they're allowed to have. Any revolving debt and the house payment. That represents 36% of their debt to income based off of, again, gross income. That 36% is going to be all revolving debt, credit cards, car payments, child support, student loans, any of that revolving debt, plus a house payment. And the house payment is PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That's got to all fit in the 36%. Now you've got to evaluate what the buyer really qualifies for. Now, here's how I think through this. 36 minus 28% is 8%, correct? Yeah. Which means if that borrower carries more than 8% debt, that's going to drive down what they can afford for a house. They can no longer afford 28%. It's going to drive that number down. The total debt has to fit in that 36%. On the other hand, if that borrower has zero revolving debt, no credit card, no car payment, no student loan, no child support, the maximum they can borrow for a house payment, PITI, is still limited at the 28%. So when I do this math, the first thing you've got to do is establish a gross monthly income. So if they've given you income as an annual basis, you've got to divide that by 12. Take that monthly gross income, and the first thing I do is I multiply it by 36%. Then I take that gross monthly income and I multiply it by 28%, 0.28 and 0.36. That's going to give me two important numbers. Number one, it's going to give me their total debt. Number two, it's going to give me total PITI house payment. Then I'm going to re-engage with the test question. And I'm going to read about this borrower. Does the test question give me any other information about revolving debt, Does it mention that they've already got a credit card payment or a car loan? I'm going to take that debt and add it up. And then here's what I do as I'm going to call it a litmus test. I'm going to take their total debt amount, the 36%, and I'm going to subtract the debt that they already are committed to. If that number is less than 28%, that's now what they can borrow. They cannot borrow the full 28%. They carry too much debt. And if they carry no debt, again, they're still bound by a maximum PITI of 28%. So that's my gauge of their affordability is I take that max debt amount minus the debt payments they already have every month. And what's left over, if it's less than the 28%, that's their new payment. If it's more than the 28%, they're still bound to the 28%. They can't go above it. Does that help to walk through that in terms of math? Okay, I like it. I like it. The big one to me right now is discount points. I feel like when rates increased a little bit in 2022, they started really doing a lot of math questions on discount points. Maybe that's my imagination. But a discount point, as a reminder, is 1% of the amount borrowed. 1% of the amount borrowed. So if they tell you the amount that's borrowed, great. My guess is you're going to have to calculate the purchase price minus their down payment, then get their loan amount to calculate the discount points. So for example, on page 83, I gave you an example where they've got a purchase price of $200,000 and a 90% loan to value. So this borrower is bringing 10%, borrowing 90 from the bank. What I did for this math is I took 200,000 multiplied by 90% or 0.90. That gives me a loan amount of $180,000. This particular test question wants to know the value of 3 discount points. So I would take 180,000 multiplied by 3%, or in your calculator, you would type 0.03. And that's going to give you a value of discount points at $5,400. And again, a discount point is a way of either temporarily or permanently buying down the interest rate so you can get a lower rate. Mortgage amortization, page 84. This is a way of calculating the principal and interest payment on a fully amortized loan, such as a conventional, FHA insured, or VA guaranteed loan. Those loans are fully amortized, meaning the principal and interest payment is the same every month, over and over and over. This chart is what helps you calculate that PI payment. Now, I've got a chart for you that I created on page 85. You might want to dog ear, is that what you call it? Dog ear that page, so that when you're doing these exam questions for practice that I've gifted you, you've got this chart to refer to if it comes up. With this, you might again have to figure loan to value to know how much they're borrowing. This is based off the loan amount to establish their PI payment. So the first thing, let's use this chart. There's the interest rate, and then there's the term of the loan. The term of the loan is another way of saying the length of it. If they say the term of the loan is 30, that means it's 30 years. It's a 30-year mortgage. What you're going to do is you're going to take the amount borrowed, and you always divide by 1,000. You always divide by 1,000. That number, I'm going to call it units. Units. So if we're borrowing $100,000, this is easy math for Amy. If we're borrowing $100,000 divided by 1,000 is 100 units, correct? Okay. Then we're going to read on, and we're going to find the mortgage factor number. So if it's a 5% interest rate for 25 years, that factor number on my chart is 5.85. So we would take those 100 units multiplied by 5.85, and that's going to give us a PI payment of $585 a month. Now, the question might also ask you to build in taxes and insurance. They'll give you those numbers for you to complete a PITI payment. But just remember, if they give you annual tax or annual insurance, what do you have to do with that number? You've got to divide it by 12. Make sure with these questions, you're really reading. Do they want things from you on an annual, monthly, or quarterly basis? That's going to determine whether you leave it, you divide or multiply by 12, or you divide or multiply by 4, depending on what they're asking you to do. Slow down and read. Does that help with mortgage payment? And one thing that they might do is have you calculate it. Another style of question they might ask you is, what's the difference between a 5% interest rate and a 6% interest rate, and all the other terms of the contract apply? Well, now you've got to figure the mortgage factor chart at 5% and 6%, and then subtract one from the other. It wants to know the difference in payment. I think that'll make sense to you, and you'll have an easy time figuring that one out. Let's talk property taxes and prorating on page 86. The first thing I want to do is talk about that mill rate again. A mill rate is used in conjunction with the assessed value that your county uses for the sole purpose of charging you property taxes. They have no idea what your house is worth. No idea. They're just trying to make an assessment of the value of property so that we can pay our bills and have working stoplights and have teachers and have parks and have a place to go pay your water bill. Do I have a question? Nope. Okay, I thought I saw a hand up. The second level of the mill rate is, as I stated earlier, it's a 1/1000th of a dollar. It's a 1/1000th of a dollar. So if I gave you 12 mil, that would be 0.012. 12% is 0.12, right? But we're not doing a percent. We're doing a mil, which that would make it 0.012. So you're going to multiply the mill rate by the assessed value. That's going to give you the annual or yearly tax. And then again, pay attention to the question. Do they want you to answer it annually, Or do they want you to answer it quarterly? Or do they want you to answer it monthly? And guess what those tinkers are going to do? They're going to give you the answers to all three. And if you didn't read the entire question or read it thoroughly and they wanted it quarterly and you stopped with annual, that answer is going to be there. You're going to feel all frisky that you got it right. And you did. So please, again, slow down and read. What are they really asking you? Annual, monthly, quarterly. Transfer tax. This is in the middle of page 86. A transfer tax is a tax charged when we transfer property from one owner to a new owner. Now, in Iowa, we call these revenue stamps. And revenue stamps are charged, just for reference, $1.60 per 1,000. And in Iowa, I believe they give you a $500 credit. The first $500 is free. They're very generous. But I will be honest, when I'm estimating for my sellers what their transfer tax will be, I usually don't worry about that. I'm just doing an estimate. But for the national exam, if you get asked this question, again, for easy math, let's say it's a $100,000 sale. Divided by 1,000 is 100 units. Multiplied by $1.60 means that your transfer tax would be $160. And that's a seller paid fee at closing. At least it is in Iowa. Now we got a little bit more difficult. And we started out rough, but we finished very strong. We finished very strong when we talked about tax proration. Now, whatever you know about paying taxes in Iowa, I kind of want you to forget it, just for the national exam. We pay taxes in Iowa very differently. The term we use here is we pay them in arrears. And you know my joke is I call it in a weirds because it is super weird what we do here in Iowa. So blank slate that if you know anything about that. If you don't know anything about how we pay taxes in Iowa, I'm actually very happy for you in this moment, just so that we can get you through this exam. I want you to think of paying taxes on a 1 calendar year, January 1 through December 31. Okay? If it's a prepaid tax, that means the seller paid it on January 1st for the upcoming year. They prepaid it for the year. It's paid in advance for the upcoming year. They paid it January 1. If it's an accrued tax, that means they pay it at the end of the installment on December 31st for the previous year. They pay it December 31st for the previous year. Because here's what we've got to determine. Based on the closing date, we need to break down who owned the property when to know who's responsible for what tax. If it's prepaid and the seller paid it on January 1 for the upcoming year, that means the buyer owes them a credit from the date of closing all the way through December 31st. The seller needs reimbursed, correct? If it's accrued and it's paid at the end of the year on December 31st for the previous year, that means the seller owes the buyer a credit from January 1st through the date of closing. They're going to give a credit to the buyer at closing so that at the end of the year, when they've got to pay taxes, they've got this seller's money for the time they owned it to put with their money for the time they owned it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, you didn't know that talking about property taxes could be so fun until you really get into it, right? Right. Now, that's my speech on taxes. The next layer I want to talk about is in the middle of page 87. There's two different ways to calculate property tax. There's the 360-day method, and there's the 365-day method. The 360-day method, this is the formula. You take the annual tax divided by 12, and then you take that monthly tax divided by 30. That's going to give you a monthly rate and a daily rate. The 360-day method, you divide by 12, you divide by 30. You divide by 12, you divide by 30. That's going to give you a monthly and a daily rate. You do not need to worry about how many days are in a month. Not with this formula. It's divide by 12, divide by 30. Now, what I coach you to do when you're doing this calculation is I'm coaching you to figure out who owes what, both buyer and seller. I'm encouraging you to figure the tax January 1 through the closing date. That's the seller's obligation. Then I'm just having you take the total tax minus the seller's obligation, and what's left over represents the tax from closing date through the end of the year. That's the buyer's obligation. And then depending on whether it's prepaid or accrued, now we determine if it's prepaid, the seller owes their portion as a credit to the buyer. If it's accrued, no, I said that backwards. If it's prepaid, the buyer owes their portion as a credit to the seller. If it's accrued, the seller owes their portion as a credit to the buyer. Let me do that again for fun because I messed it up. If it's prepaid, the buyer owes their portion as a credit to the seller. If it's accrued, the seller owes their portion as a credit to the buyer. Now, you might remember back on page 73 of this here handout, I gave you an example of a settlement statement, or closing disclosure is the formal name. And on one side was all of the buyer figures to close this loan, and on the right-hand side was all the seller figures. And some of those lines had a line that said the same number on the buyer or the seller side, right? Well, that's because one person was receiving it as a debt, the other person was receiving it as a credit. We were doing that to prorate property taxes. So this is where it gets used. I see your faces and I feel your energy, even though we're on Zoom. And here's what I want to share with you. Those settlement statements, in my experience, most of you are going to have a third party that handles it. A staff member in your office, a third party settlement or title company, or sometimes an attorney's office will help put together that form and all those fees. But when I list a property with a seller, one of the best services I feel like I offer my sellers is I help them estimate their proceeds. So based on what I think our most likely sales price is, minus all of the fees to sell their property, paying off their mortgage, revenue stamps, title opinions and abstracting, my realtor fees, maybe a buyer's realtor fees, Any fee that they would incur, including paying accrued taxes, I estimate on that form. So I do think it's good that you understand the concept here. And by the way, I'm a broker, and you're going to do this for your agents as well. Every settlement statement that I have for a client, I review every single figure. I check that nothing's missing. And what is there, I do verify its accuracy. I do make sure that that's in alignment. So I comb through every settlement statement with every closing. I make sure nothing's missing because I'm accountable for that. And then number two, I make sure we've got the right numbers. I mean, gosh forbid they short me commission. No, I'm just kidding. But are the numbers where they should be? And I'm usually pretty close in my estimate, even though it's an estimate. So that's why it's important that we know this concept as a real. I do think I forgot to give you this definition. We got on a rant about the 360-day method. 360-day method, again, divide by 12, divide by 30. That gives you a monthly and daily rate. You do not need to worry about the number of days in a month. That's the formula. The 365-day formula, you're going to take the annual or yearly tax and divide by 365. That's going to give you a daily rate, which means you do need to know the number of months or number of days in each month. And here's my rhyme for you. 30 days, half September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31 except for February, which is weird. I like the word weird, don't I, today? And some of you know a knuckle method. Again, I was not taught that in the Washington County School District, bless their hearts. So 30-day half September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except for February, which is weird. And speaking of February, don't overthink yourself and wonder, oh my God, was 2022 a leap year? Right? Don't worry about that. Only if it says leap year, worry about it. If it doesn't say leap year, it's 28, right? Keep it simple. Yeah. And I will give you a gift. It is called Iowa Tax Pro Calc. And that is a way to calculate them in Iowa. And I will show you what this screen looks like. Iowa Tax Pro Calc. I can do those for you longhand, but someone made a website. So that way, when you go and you know their annual tax, I must have done this before at $4,800. Let's say that's the annual tax for the property. And we know we've got a closing date of, let's say, August 15th. We can calculate it. And we know that that means in Iowa, our sellers would owe the buyer a credit for 13 months and 5 days, totaling $5,397.26. The per diem or the daily rate is $13.15, which means if for some reason we don't close on the 15th, and now we've got to close on the 18th, the following Monday, we can just adjust that $13.15 times 3. So you guys are fortunate. You've got a little bit of a cheat code here with this Iowa Tax Pro Calc. I believe Les Solgrove and his son created this. I don't know if that's true, but I'll give Les credit all day long because he's awesome.